Today I am going to begin the second class on the book Essential Practice by Thrangu Rinpoche. And I am going to begin on the end of the second chapter, where he talks about there being three aspects of knowledge. And they are the knowledge that arises from hearing, and then there is the knowledge that arises from contemplation. And he uses the example of examining gold to decide whether to buy it or not, whether it's valuable. The idea is that we examine the teachings that we have received and see if it makes sense and are they useful and so forth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And then chapter 4, which I'm planning on going to also, that is about the knowledge that arises from meditation. So that's where we are going today. This first analysis of reasonings on the analysis of causes. And this is from Chandrakirti's entrance into the middle way. I think it comes from Nagarjuna. It's analysis of emptiness. The conclusion, I'm going to get to that before I go through the analysis, is that conventional appearances result from comparison and causes. And that's conventional reality. Ultimate reality is that the causes and the objects of comparison have no ultimate solidity, that they have no ultimate, that they're empty, very simply. So here are some analysis that he goes through in this text. Things arise from causes. Effects do not arise in the absence of causes, or flowers would grow any time of year, anywhere. Then the next is permanent causes do not produce effects. And he is counteracting the argument that there is a God that causes things. And this would have come from the Hindu belief in gods. But it would be the same thing for a Christian God or a Jewish God or an Islam God. So if a permanent cause produced effects, there would be flowers blooming everywhere year-round. And then impermanent causes do not produce effects is another argument that he goes into. And again, you can read this book and go into them in much more detail. I'm just giving a summary here. The past doesn't produce effects. That's pretty obvious. The future doesn't produce effects. Unless you watch the movie Back to the Future or something like that, some other science fiction. So the present doesn't produce effects because you can't have both the causes and the effects at the same time. So all of this is pointing out that these things are emptiness. And again, conventionally, things appear to be dependent on causes and effects. Here is a quote. Conventionally, independence upon causes, effects merely arise. that finishes that chapter, and I'm going to go to the next one. And again, I'll be having time for questions and discussion here. So if something comes up, by all means, make a note of it and feel free to ask later on. Each chapter is an individual talk, and he begins each chapter talking about the importance of motivation. And so I'm going to just mention that here, that our motivation to listening to these talks, reading and practice in general is very, very important. And of course, the motivation is to benefit ourselves and to benefit other beings. After that, he says, now the discussion of practice involves two topics, method and knowledge. And now he's going to be considering knowledge. And there is the knowledge that arises from hearing, the knowledge that arises from contemplation, and the knowledge that arises from meditation. And this is kind of a repeat of what was at the end of that last chapter. Now we're talking about the knowledge that arises from contemplation. So there is this analysis of causation, and then the reasoning of freedom from one and many. So he categorizes things that we perceive directly into two groups. Those that have form, such as are objects of our sense consciousnesses, and those that have no form. These are the object of consciousness, and these are an internal aspect of our mind. And he says there are other systems that divide them differently, but I'm just going to skip that, just letting you know. So in terms of external forms, the classic way to look at these is to divide external forms into smaller and smaller and smaller parts. I remember the Buddha talked about a chariot. You divide it into parts, wheels, axle, and so on and so forth. And then those all are made up of smaller parts. And this is the same kind of analysis. So the Buddha talked about the aggregate of form. And aggregate means a collection. It can mean a heap. So the hand was used as an example, made out of fingers, thumb, joints, blood, muscle. And then they didn't have microscopes back then, but they logically divided these parts into smaller parts and smaller parts and smaller parts. And I don't think this was in this text, but I've heard it translated as the smallest particle being an atom. The thing is, well, even a small particle is going to have a top, a bottom, and sides. So now you've got parts. The point is, even the smallest part has parts. He didn't talk about modern physics, but again, you can go down the same rabbit hole in modern physics, and what do you find? A lot of space, a lot of energy, and things that I can't even explain, like string theory. So the point is that you can divide these things into smaller and smaller and smaller, and still you get nothing. The point is that external forms are emptiness. So then it gets to this analysis that, well, the mind has no form. Is it one? Is it many? Well, the mind can experience a hand as one, or it can experience it as parts. So the mind is, you could say both, but it's neither. If it's not one, how can it be two or three or four? So to quote the Buddha, external forms do not exist. Our own mind appears as the external. So the external is empty, and it appears in our mind as being external. Our mind is not one, and it's not many. In this analysis, in terms of many things can appear simultaneously in our mind, but if you look at one, you can't even determine that it's one. And if you can't determine that it's one, how can you determine that it's more than one? This is a very Buddhist form of logic by refutation, by kind of elimination. I remember, this is slightly different, but I remember a talk that Taisitu gave, and he was asked, is it one mind or is it many minds? And he said, well, if it was one mind, when the Buddha was enlightened, we'd all be enlightened. But it's not two. So chew on that for a little while. So anyway, to go on here, neither external form nor internal mind is truly established, meaning they are empty. Everything from the ultimate point of view is considered false, that they are like the appearances of a dream, and that these appearances appear and they are like an illusion. The external forms appear despite them not being established. He uses the word entity not being established, and here meaning that they are not established as being unchanging, solid, having a, you might say, a sort of self. I like to use the example of a singing bowl. You know, good old Tibetan singing bowl. I don't have one here to hold up. But yeah, okay, it's a singing bowl, right? Well, if I had a dog and filled it up with water, put it on the floor, the dog would not think it was a singing bowl. I could take it to a scrap dealer and he would analyze the metallic content, weigh it, and say it was worth so much money. I got one from my parents who traveled to Nepal and India, and they were using the singing bowl for well, they had a potted plant in it. You know, it contained the water when they'd water the plant, and it made a nice ornament and so forth. And then again, take it to a physicist, and he can keep dividing it into molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, and on and on and on. It looks like a singing bowl, but it isn't. You can call it a singing bowl, but that's not what it is. He goes back, as I'm continuing to go through this chapter, talking about images that appear in a mirror, they are just images that appear in the mirror. Are they one with the mirror? Are they separate from the mirror? It's all mere appearance. And again, the Buddha said that the ultimate is that none of these entities are established on their own. They're done by comparison, by causality, and so forth. Again, by comparison, here was one experience that I had. I was a fairly young man at this time. I married a woman from Hawaii who was of Japanese descent, and I've always considered myself fairly short. And he went to a reunion of the unit that he fought in during Second World War. You know, he fought for the United States, of course. And everybody in the room was Japanese American. And I could see across the room. I was one of the tallest people in the room. Well, so much for being short. You could also say I was the only round eyes in the room, too. And a kind of a pun on people calling Asian slant eyes. Anyway, so now he gives a refutation of thinking that karma doesn't exist, because this is a serious problem if you don't understand emptiness. It's like, oh, well, I can do whatever I want to. There's no such thing. Karma doesn't exist, yada, yada, yada. So this is his argument about why we have to pay attention to karma. If phenomena were not emptiness, things would be concrete and truly established, and there would be no change. Nothing would change. But because of emptiness, change occurs. And because of change, the effects arise due to causes. Now, this is from the conventional reality viewpoint. Therefore, it's beneficial to accumulate virtuous karma, and his words is I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It's not to your advantage to accumulate bad karma. Let me see here, going on to the next point here. Well, what comes to my mind is Gampopa said that, well, my view is as vast as the sky. My attention to karma is as fine as grains of zampa, which is ground barley flour. We do run into karma. It might not be truly existent. Again, one of my favorite examples is that there's an interstate highway that I'm on a lot. And, well, of course, it is not established as an entity. It's empty. My body is not established as an entity. It's empty. So I could go out there on that empty highway with my empty body, and an empty 18-wheeler would run over me, and I would have an empty, painful death. That's why we pay attention to karma and try to accumulate a lot of good karma. Here is a quote: like the moon in the water, whatever appears to us, causes, affects, everything dawns through the power of not being truly established. This is what was taught in this knowledge that arises from contemplation. To sum it up, those have form are objects of sense consciousness. Those that do not have forms are objects of consciousness, and they are internal. Now, the next step is we have to generate the knowledge that arises from meditation. And then when that knowledge has arisen from contemplation, it's necessary to meditate. So contemplation is one step. Now it's time to meditate. We meditate on emptiness so we can understand the meaning, that we familiarize ourselves with it, so that when we're meditating and we actually have the experience, we can recognize it, and you could say, not get upset about it. And so it can become even clearer and clearer and more stable. I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche during a question and answer session. A man asked, it was really a statement. He didn't ask a question. He just said, Rinpoche, I'm afraid of emptiness. And Rinpoche's answer was, I'm not. So by this logical reasoning, we can get more and more familiar with this. We have lifetimes of habitual patterns that deny this, that look at things as being solid and real and so on and so forth. So then we meditate. And the first type of meditation, of course, is calm abiding. After that is insight meditation. The calm abiding is done to stabilize our minds. And a very good example is muddy water versus calm water. Muddy water, it's not clear, you don't see through it. You just see muddy water. Calm water, you can see through. An example that's more modern that I think is very easy to understand is if you take a mason jar with a top on it and it's full of muddy water, as long as you keep going like this, you've got muddy water. But if you set it down on a table and let it sit for a few hours or maybe overnight, the mud settles to the bottom. The natural clarity of the water shows. And so our mind has natural clarity. And if we stabilize our mind by cultivating calm abiding, our minds will become much clearer and we will see things much more clearly. We can accomplish what we set out to do with a clear mind. So Kamalashila enumerates 4 causes for accomplishing meditation. First is, do not look to desire. We avoid extreme desire and instead think, now I will meditate well. If desire does arise, don't let it, you might say, throw you out of the saddle. Don't let it disrupt your meditation. Just let go of it. You don't have to hang on to it. The second is abide well in ethics. He says, act in a simple way. Use self-control, govern yourself. My full monastic name is Karma Solkram Yeshe. Karma means a member of the Kagyu, Karma Kagyu. Solkram is ethical conduct, and Yeshe is wisdom. And I joke sometimes and say, what that means is that if I'm wise, I'll behave myself. This is what's being talked about here, that use a little wisdom, behave yourself, put some limits on your behavior, and this will help your mind settle down. If your mind is full of anger, you're not going to be able to settle down. If you've got grudges, if you've got unfinished business, if you're feeling guilty about yourself, and so on and so forth, all this just causes the mind to churn, remain unclear, and you can't settle down. So then the next is having the nature of taking on suffering voluntarily. And this, to me, it sounds actually worse than it really is. What it means is to just bear the difficulties of meditation. Yes, it can be difficult, but I mean, it's not like being in intense pain and having to sit there and bear it. The difficulties of meditation, first of all, are getting to the cushion as opposed to all the activities that we involved in our daily lives, and then not being able to sit still because, oh, I've got to do this, oh, I've got to do that, or feeling that you're having too many thoughts running through your mind, that, oh, I just can't take this. It just keeps like just one thought after another, after another, after another. Well, okay, bear it. Be with it for a while. It's not something that's intolerable. And we're going to go into this more, but eventually you can develop joy in meditation. And the last of the four is exertion. And that means actually doing the meditation rather than sitting there and, letting your mind wander. That's the end of that section. Now is calm abiding meditation. That was kind of a lead up to that. And again, he begins this chapter with talking about pure motivation, which is wanting to travel the path for the benefit of yourself and benefit of all sentient beings, which means wanting to become a Buddha. So I just talked about the method, and now we're going to talk about knowledge. So knowledge arises in dependence on hearing, contemplation, and meditation. And meditation is calm abiding and insight. So let's see, I just finished these four parts of calm abiding. He goes over those. I'm going to skip going over those since I just did. Now, where to meditate? A place that's pleasing to the mind. This is especially important for beginners, or if your mind is easily disturbed. And then the next point is where there's little disturbance from others. He says not much noise at night from animals or human beings. This brought back a memory of the 3-year retreat. And that was, we would make lots and lots and lots of tormas out of oatmeal and butter. And in the evening, we would offer them. We were done with them. We would throw them over the fence. And of course, the top of the fence was lined with squirrels waiting for this. And then when it got dark, the skunks and the raccoons came out. You wouldn't believe the noise that was going on at night fighting for those tormas. Needless to say, we were practiced meditators, and it wasn't all that disturbing, but for a new meditator to hear animals screaming and screeching and fighting, that would be very hard to meditate. It would be very distracting. So, yeah, avoid places like that, especially when you are relatively new or at least not a seasoned practitioner. And also have a clean and pleasant place to meditate. The next is a session, how you would structure a meditation session. You could have a statue of the Buddha, you could have a statue of a bodhisattva or a number of bodhisattvas, you could have pictures, tankas, various representations, sacred representations of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddhas. Do a 7-branch prayer, and there are lots of 7-branch prayers. In Chenrezig, there is a 7-branch prayer. A 7-branch prayer has first homage to the Buddhas, or sometimes prostrations, a confession, offerings, confession, rejoicing in the merit of others, requesting the Buddhas to teach, requesting them to remain, and then a dedication of merit. And I might have left out one. I wasn't counting on my fingers how many, but these are standard prayers. There are lots of them out there, and they have these same branches in them. After that 7-branch prayer, then just make this aspiration or try to develop compassion for all sentient beings. So if you're doing this not only for yourself, but for all sentient beings, then you would sit in what's called the 7, here it's 7 qualities of Vairochana, or the 5 qualities of stable contemplation. I think all of you have had this, but I'll go over extremely briefly. The first is sitting on a cushion with your legs crossed, if it's possible. Khenpo Rinpoche would give, not many other teachers would do this, but he would have you curl your ring finger over your thumb like this and put your hands on your thighs. In many traditions, you would, if you can see it like that, put that in your lap. So that would be your hand mudra, then straighten your back. Have your jaw a little bit lowered so your teeth, upper and lower teeth, aren't touching. Rinpoche would have you touch the roof of your mouth with your tongue, and then eyes straight ahead and maybe lowered to the floor a little bit. And then finally bring your neck back and your head back so that your skull, your neck, and your back were all in a straight line. Those are the points. And then breathing naturally. That's a brief rundown on the meditation posture. This gets a little complicated. He talks about resting our mind on things that have form or things that don't have form. Place your mind on the 5 aggregates, basically on some object of one of the senses. He then goes into special instructions from the Karma Kagyu. First, you would place your mind on an impure object, like a stone or a small piece of wood, and then just concentrate on it, look at it, and focus on it. And when your mind starts wandering, then just bring it back to looking at this object. And then, of course, the next stage would have a rupa, a statue of the Buddha or one of the bodhisattvas. And again, just look at it, stare at it, and try to concentrate on it. Then the next step would be following the breath, and we're all familiar with that. Holding the mind on the breath is the standard practice for meditation. That's the one that is used most frequently. These others are kind of, you might say, like training wheels. So then there are 6 faults that are problems with meditative stability. And there are 8 applications or antidotes to these. And they're going to be covered later in the chapter. I'm going to get to them in a minute, but it's mentioned in the book at this point. The text by Kamalashila mentions some things only briefly, and I'm just going to run through these quickly. But if desire arises when you're meditating, meditate on ugliness. If a woman comes to mind, think of what she'll look like when she's 80. If a man comes to mind, think of me. I'll be 80 in a couple of months. Or just think of an ugly person. And if anger and hatred, irritation come to mind, meditate on love. For ignorance, or he uses the word bewilderment, meditate on the independent relationships that we all have. And what that means is take your pick, any object, well, your food. I like to use the example, I like to snack on mixed nuts, roasted mixed nuts. And one of my favorite brands is, well, it's got Mr. Peanut on the front of it. Well, it turns out that the Hormel, the makers of Spam, own that company now. And that if you look at the ingredients, and Hormel is located in Austin, Minnesota, not Austin, Texas. And if you look at the ingredients, it says the country of origin. And there are a lot of countries that these nuts come from. Most of them do not come from the United States. And in those countries, then you have people that are working, growing them, cultivating them, harvesting them, processing them, yada, yada, yada. And when you buy a jar of nuts, a little bit of what you spend on that is going all over the world. And those people that are getting that money, they need food and shelter at some level anyway. And so they're spending it to other people in their country and other places. And then the machinery that is used to process, grow, and transport and so forth comes from all over the world. And then the energy, data. Basically, when I'm eating some nuts, I'm touching just about the whole world. And this is the way we fit in with things. When we are thinking this is all about me, this is bewilderment. It's really all about everybody. He says here that if you want to know more about these different remedies for attachment, hatred, and bewilderment, look into the ornament, The Precious Liberation, that was written by Gampopa, which is a classic. So then he goes into some ways of working with these. As I said, the 6 problems and the 8 remedies. I got ahead of myself there. He says here, when such distractions arise, they arise because we do not like meditative stabilization. We like distraction. So we have to develop a like for meditation and a dislike for distraction. He says if we can do that, dislike the faults, joy and delight in meditation will arise. And so to think about these things, that A, it's necessary and beneficial to have stability in our meditation. It helps others as well as ourselves. When we aren't on the cushion 24/7, that we go out and we have relationships with other people. And if our mind is more stable, we're going to be a lot more benefit to other people. We're going to be spreading less dissatisfaction, less discomfort, more love, more harmony, and so forth. And we're going to feel better about ourselves. The next point is that this stability, meditation, a stable meditation will protect us from suffering. Happiness will arise in our minds and our bodies. Our afflictions will decrease and eventually be pacified. And finally, Buddhahood will be achieved. So contemplate these things. He is a bit repetitive here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through what he has next, but it is we must pacify distraction. Distraction prevents stable meditation, and it prevents us from progressing. Distraction keeps our good qualities from arising. Of course, we will just continue lifetime after lifetime after lifetime in various states in samsara. And finally, our afflictions will increase. So then he talks about 2 main ones with meditation. And one is laxity, that's the word that he uses. And the other is excitement. So going into laxity, that is, well, it's kind of the root word of relax. It's a little bit too relaxed. It's a sleepiness, lethargy, a hazy mind, and even falling asleep. So needless to say, all of these are problems. I've heard this. One of the Tibetan words or phrases for sleep is the samadhi of stupidity. There's no lucidity there. And the antidote is to watch your mind. Make sure that when you even start going there a little bit, try to remember lucidity, the importance of lucidity. Think of the qualities of the Buddha. Think of what you want to accomplish and how you need to stay alert in order to do this. There are a lot of other remedies, but that's what he mentioned here, so I'm not going to go into other ones. Now, excitement is the next one. wildness is a term he uses, and this comes from remembering happy times, good things, joy that we've experienced in the past. So here, the remedy is to meditate on impermanence. Remember that things change, that these good times and so forth that you are remembering happened in the past, and that this is the nature of cyclic existence. So you want to generate some, you might say, some discouragement or distrust of cyclic existence. Realize that there are more important things. Thrangu Rinpoche says that actually these are the principal obstacles to stable meditation. Here is a little bit more about these. There are remedies. One, those that require effort, and those that are effortless. The remedy that requires effort is that we have to recognize laxity and excitement, and then make an effort immediately to apply the methods for abandoning them until they have been abandoned. Now, the next is when you have separated yourself from laxity and excitement, to then drop the remedy and rest in equipoise. Because at this point, you don't need to have the effort anymore. So when the mind rests well, then you don't have to apply these remedies anymore. So just apply them as needed, and then when they've been effective, let go. So that's the way of with effort and the way of effortlessly. Now, next comes these 9 methods for abiding, or there are 9 stages of shamatha. And I honestly don't know if these are in the Kamalashila treatise or these come from the 9th Karmapa, but they're definitely standard in the Kagyu lineage. So the first is placing the mind. And this means for very brief periods of time, even if it's a moment, resting in meditation. And then the second stage is continually placing. So when this first step is going well, then you have a longer period of time of resting in meditation without the mind going wild or being distracted. The next stage is repeatedly placing. And that means that now you've brought your mind back to meditation, and then it goes off again, and now you bring it back repeatedly. So first you place it in meditation, then it's gone. But after doing that for a while, then you place it in meditation and it lasts longer. Then you place it in meditation, it goes off, you bring it back, meditate for a while, it goes off, you bring it back. So that is what this repeatedly placing in meditation is meant. Then close placement is the fourth. And this is, you notice that you have been distracted. This is mindfulness. And then he uses the word conscientiousness. Another word could be awareness. I hope I'm not causing confusion here. But the mindfulness alerts you to the fact that you're distracted. The awareness brings you back. So that is close placement, that your period of non-distraction becomes longer and longer. And again, this isn't like you have one session and then the next one you have the next day is going to be longer, and then one you're going to have the day after that longer yet. No, it's up and down, but in the long run, it's becoming longer. The fifth is taming. And this is when you are developing joy and delight in meditating. You are thinking about the good qualities and that you can abandon distraction in he uses the term gentle manner, and that it's not a hardship or a difficulty. What comes to my mind as a hardship is, oh, I'm having this wonderful train of thoughts. I'm on a beach somewhere in the Bahamas, and oh, I should be meditating, but oh, it would be a hardship to meditate when I could be on the beach. Anyway, taming is, okay, I'm going to do it, and it's wonderful to be able to do this. Pacifying is when you generate joy. This is number 6. And distraction arises, but you realize the faults of the distraction, the disadvantages. You're not enjoying the distractions anymore. And he says you can even become a little angry with the distraction. And if you get angry or don't enjoy it, they won't come around so much anymore. So that is the remedy. And then thoroughly pacifying is number 7. And here, when sleepiness arises, you apply the necessary practices and you pacify it. Quote, when they arise, we must rely vigorously on the antidotes. So this is being vigilant. I think that's a good word for it. You're vigilant and you apply the remedy right away. Number 8 is making one pointed. And so here we're placing our minds loosely and gently. We don't have to apply antidotes. We're actually resting in a natural state. This is my analysis here. It's more like you're letting yourself be instead of letting yourself do. You don't have to do anything. You can just let yourself be in this natural state. And then the 9th, the last stage, is evenly placing. And here we're not joyful, he used the word sorrow. We don't use an antidote. We just rest in equanimity without doing anything. You just rest in equanimity. And that is the final stage of shamatha. Now, The last part is going into the 6 faults and the 8 remedies. So I'll go through that, and then I'll open this up to questions and answers. First of all, here we go back to laziness. That's the first fault. It means having no interest in meditation. In this case, no interest in meditation, not liking meditation. Finding meditation is difficult. So the remedy is to generate faith in the good qualities of meditation, stable meditation. And so we need this conviction that this has good qualities, stable meditation. He uses meditative stabilization. Then the other one is longing. We want to have a longing that we may cultivate this stable meditation. And aspiration is kind of an element of this too. Exertion is another element here. With exertion, then our minds and our bodies become more useful to us. The fourth antidote to abandoning laziness is thorough refinement. We have developed the desire to abandon laziness. So another fault is forgetting object of observation. Sometimes the mind wanders, we forget the instructions, forget what we're supposed to be placing our awareness on. The fifth remedy here is mindfulness, always making our mind one-pointedly undistracted, looking for faults, and then cultivating stable meditation. So that is the role of mindfulness, that it, quote, abandons the fault of forgetting the object of observation. Then there is excitement. Here, excitement is awareness, is the antidote to both laxity and excitement. Awareness means looking at the details and does so when you are meditating, when distraction occurs, rather than a post-mortem later on. Another problem is not making an effort to correct a fault when one arises. So here, the remedy is to have the intention to make an effort to correct this not making an effort. Another problem can be making an effort. So when the mind is stable, stop making an effort. You don't have to fix anything at that point. And I talked about equanimity earlier here. Here, equanimity means resting in a relaxed way without thinking about anything to be really important. Whatever comes up, well, it's not really that important. Again, you don't have anything to do. So these are the 6 faults and the 8 applications. And that finishes the chapter. And I've probably left all of you wondering, what next?